This is a WDIV production.
Getting away with murder. That's what several cold-blooded killers thought they had accomplished. Now, decades after the crime, they are suddenly being locked up, thanks in part to a woman who refused to give up. 4 kids were abducted, held captive, then killed days later. Cooper can't talk about the case because of grand jury secrecy laws.
We have an ongoing active investigation.
But wants the family in the child serial killer case and all of Oakland County's unsolved cases to know that her team cares deeply and is determined to see that those responsible are apprehended. Cooper says the cold case unit will continue to be a priority, saying it does not matter when the crime was committed, only that justice is served.
Jessica Cooper is administering her office based on the results she wants and not on the law that she learned.
They are emotionally involved, okay? They want that answer. We would love to give them that answer. It's not something I'm capable of doing. I cannot make a declaration that someone who is deceased has committed this crime. And basically I can only give him the facts, and sometimes he doesn't remember all of the facts that we've given him.
I'd like to talk to Brooks Patterson, Thompson, and Cooper under oath with their right hands raised. And if they're correct, I'll acknowledge that I may have made some mistakes. And if it turns out they're incorrect, I would assume that the public might be quite upset.
Well, Mr. King thinks that there is still information that he has not been given, that the public has not been given, that we should have been given about the child killer investigation. It has taken great effort on his part to get the information that he has been given. He's been given thousands of pages about the investigation from Michigan State Police. He's had to jump through a lot of hoops to get it.
And I completely understand what Barry would like. I get that. As a father, I would want the same thing. And I know Brooks Patterson made a statement to the media a year or two ago. He said that if I was the Oakland County prosecutor right now, I'd bring Mr. King in and open the files up on a table and let him look at everything. And that's because Brooks Patterson has compassion for these families.
He comes up and he was trying to get a hold of his file, and the prosecutor and I don't get along, so she's not going to follow my lead. So I made it very clear, if I were a prosecutor, and I said, look, Jessica, say, swear him in, make him an assistant for 1 day. Now he's on your staff. He would have access, all kinds of ways to relieve her fears that, it's an ongoing investigation. All right, make him an assistant. Well, without cost, let him serve for a week, and then he can get to the file.
Everyone responds differently. I understand that he's responded, and I understand that he's angry. I'm a grown-up. I can't get angry back. I understand that he, again, is having some problems, and I understand that he is in tremendous pain, and he would love it closed. I would love it closed.
So some cop up there saved this stuff?
He's a lawyer. He knows exactly how to access the courts, and so I couldn't give him any advice he didn't already know, except I tried to suggest how he might satisfy the expressed concerns. I said to him, ever put you on the staff for a day? And that happens. When people come in, and if there's a case, you can appoint a lawyer to your staff, and he can become an assistant prosecutor for, who knows, for a week because of a particular case. I mean, I've seen that happen in this county, happen in Livingston County. She just wouldn't do it.
The interesting thing about Brooks is when I first met him, he said if he was still prosecutor, he'd appoint me an assistant prosecutor and let me look at all the files. And he never told me that he had found that Christopher Bush was innocent.
Barry King says the man seen in this mugshot abducted and murdered his son Timmy more than 30 years ago.
And I'm pretty certain that if I'd gotten up to the Oakland County files, that portion of the examination would not have been there.
King recently shelled out about $11,000 to obtain all of these never-before-seen police reports and court files. He says this helped solve the mystery of who killed Timmy and 3 other children in Oakland County. Photos of Timmy King fill his father's home. His son's murder and the search for the killer has haunted King and his family for more than 3 decades. The anniversary of Timmy's death and constant speculation over the years about the ID of the killer has obviously been difficult.
It bothered some of my children more than others, and me. We had various reactions to it, but and it had a terrible impact on 2 of them. And one of the children and I guess could absorb it and understand it.
Now armed with new information, King says he believes he's cracked this case wide open himself. The Birmingham attorney now revealing he believes the guy in this mugshot, Christopher Bush, a known pedophile who was convicted several times of sexually assaulting children in 1977, is the Oakland County child killer. Bush lived in Birmingham. He was the son of a wealthy GM exec. He never served time for assaulting victims in the Flint area, and he was living in Oakland County when Timmy vanished.
They interviewed one of Bush's nephews. He said, yeah, I remember my Uncle Chris taking me up and showing me where Timmy King, or the last boy, he didn't know Tim's name maybe, was abducted.
Bush and his friend Gregory Green faced the same charges in 1977. Bush walked, Green was locked up for life. Mr. King says because Bush came from a wealthy family, he had access to attorneys who worked to get him off the hook. Because of his criminal past, he was questioned about the Oakland County child killings, but allegedly passed the polygraph test. King says the evidence he obtained shows that he may have failed 2 of those tests. The 3rd was inconclusive. King also says there was a report from a person who called police near the Bush's northern Michigan cottage. A neighbor noticed something of concern. Police never responded.
Timmy was missing from March 16th to March the 22nd. On March the 19th, somebody called the sheriff's department in Montmorency County and said that pedophile Bush is back up here with 2 children.
King has spent the last week digging through these investigative reports, 3,400 pages in all. The goal, to solve the mystery, to bring closure to his family and the families of the other victims. He says he'll keep digging because he feels shut out by some investigators, including Oakland County prosecutor Jessica Cooper.
We shouldn't be adversaries. We should both be trying to find out whether Christopher Bush is involved or not. It shouldn't be a fight.
It's very damaging to the families to have all of these suspects. They want to know all of this information, and then it turns out it's not them. And you can't put all that information in the street in case there is someone who is still living. If someone is still living and they know everything that's gone on, they know everything that the task force has done, they know everything that the police has done. I mean, how silly, how contraindicated, how absolutely devastating it would be if that person is still alive and they know everything that we know.
You know, it's an ongoing investigation, and we are going to keep the Kings and all the other families informed the best we can for right now.
He paid a lot of money to get this information, which has been, through him, much of it put out into the public domain, and it's very helpful. Is there still crucial investigation information which has been not revealed to him and to the public that should have been? Of course, he thinks so, and he thinks that the current prosecutor, Jessica Cooper, a former judge, is hiding things from him, certainly not cooperating with him. The 2 are not on speaking terms.
I'm being treated this way in my judgment, and I would welcome the opportunity to talk to officials and have it convince me that I'm wrong. I'm convinced that there was some relationship between Patterson and the Bush family that's unanswered. I don't understand why Jessica Cooper, who's never prepared or tried a case for 40 years, ever got elected prosecutor. But I could understand if I was prosecutor today and Bush was charged, I'd wonder how I would go back to erase the 1977 release.
They arrested Chris Bush in late January of 1977, and they thought, the Flint cops thought he and Green was such a good case. They alerted Oakland County, and Dick Thompson flew up there supposedly in a helicopter in the midst of a snowstorm. And there was a lot of circumstantial evidence.
Christopher Bush was a lead that I developed through information from the Kings back in 2007. And over the course of that investigation, we identified Greg Green. Bush and Green are both pedophiles that are deceased now. And it was a good lead, and it was a good circumstantial case against these guys.
I started a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit against the state police. And once Jessica Cooper went public, or not public, but private to me, that Bush wasn't involved, I started a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit against her. And then when the first one got thrown out, I asked for specific documents, and that one got thrown out too.
When Jessica Cooper took office, she refused to talk to my family. She even took me to court and falsely accused me of a felony.
What you hear from Barry King isn't a script. He wrote it himself, and he offered to do an endorsement for Mike Bishop, who is running against Oakland County Prosecutor Jessica Cooper.
He recently released some information on the case which may jeopardize the investigation.
And Cooper says the attack isn't warranted and it isn't fair.
They have no merit. We've talked to Mr. King. I've talked to Mr. King. I've talked to Mr. King's attorney. Paul, who is my chief assistant, has talked to Mr. King for hours on end.
I would like her to tell me how often she's met with me and when, because if she told you that, it's totally incorrect.
Mr. King is so deeply involved in this. He is his own investigation, after all, of the child killings, that you can understand his frustration if the prosecutor is no longer talking to him. Are they trying to hide things from him? Are they trying to hide a conspiracy to cover up their own malfeasance, their own bungling of the case, or trying to cover something up that we don't know?
We don't have this because we haven't been served. Do you want a copy? How did you get it?
Larry Wasser is a polygraph expert who told us straight up he can't talk about the lawsuit. When we called the man who filed it, Patrick Coffey, another polygraph expert in California, he told me he can't talk about it either. What they aren't talking about is allegations in one of the most talked about unsolved murder cases ever, the Oakland County child killer case. Coffey insists Wasser told him that this man, Christopher Bush, is the Oakland County child killer, and that he once gave him a lie detector test in an unrelated case. Bush is a convicted sex offender who lived near the victims and committed suicide about the time the abduction stopped. Police investigating the 30-year-old unsolved murders moved Bush to the top of the suspect list, but have found no conclusive evidence. Wasser's attorney is quoted as saying the polygraph expert Coffey made it all up, that his account is bogus and is putting the families through unnecessary suffering. Coffey stands by his story and filed this lawsuit alleging Wasser and his attorney of malicious slander.
In order to determine it's any one person, you'd have to rule the others out. So the key would be just to make sure they follow all the evidence on all the suspects. We don't have any investment in any particular suspect. We just want to make sure the police and the prosecutors have done their due diligence and done their job.
He was arrested with his pal, Greg Green, and Greg Green immediately told them that Chris Bush had killed Mark Stebbins. And it's interesting, once they got the Chris Bush name and Corey starts looking through the files, just this avalanche of evidence came. He was interrogated and asked, he lived in Birmingham? In Bloomfield Village in a 5-bedroom house. He'd been arrested and convicted 4 times of, sex with minors and got off on each charge.
I didn't think Chris Bush was probably capable of the abductions and the killings themselves. He was just a slob in and of himself, and I didn't think was probably articulate and crafty enough, if you will, to pull this off, but to be someone's fall guy and be part of the bigger picture, absolutely. And likewise, Greg Green, he had a record a mile long, and here I think he was in Michigan, but yet California was trying to bring him back there for crimes that had been committed.
Gregory Green was a pedophile. He was convicted of sexual assault in California. He served some time in the California system in a mental ward and then was released. He eventually travels and moves to Michigan. He associates with Christopher Bush. They seem to become fast friends pretty quickly. During the time that Timothy King was abducted and later found murdered, Mr. Green was in custody.
Dozens of documents the family has never seen. Detailed facts and information police and prosecutors never knew. Now open for investigation for the first time. Inside the files, a shocking discovery. Look for yourself at the official investigator's notes from a sexual predator investigation in Montmorency County. It says, quote, "The Oakland County Task Force that was involved in the investigation of the kidnapping and homicide of 5 juveniles became involved in this matter." This document is dated January 31st, 1977. It's written before victim Timothy King was even killed.
It's disturbing that chunks of evidence are missing or haven't been looked at by the people who make these decisions.
Chris Bush told them he liked to, he liked to pick up boys, and he liked to keep them for long periods of time. And when they asked him where he would procure his boys, he named in chronological order the sites in which our 3 kids at that time had been picked up from. And nobody put that together until 35 years later.
Only in the aftermath of what happened did I become aware later of Christopher Bush and his knack for getting out of trouble.
He takes a polygraph and he passes the polygraph. And Greg Green passed the polygraph too. And for some reason, he gets deals all over the state, while Greg Green, for the same charge, goes to prison for life. Dick Thompson wrote no deals on his arrest record. No deals. He wrote it twice.
Bush got probation. His co-defendant, Gregory Green, got life in prison for doing the same boy. I'd like an explanation on that, too.
He was the son of a prominent General Motors executive. Mr. Bush was a vice president in General Motors and was a prominent person in the community. And it was thought, after all of this had happened, that his connections and his power in the community helped get his son off the hook whenever Mr. Bush was called on to bring about whatever he could do with the powers that be.
The investigation all started when Bush was identified, and the police reports indicate that he was quizzed about the Mark Stebbins murder in January of '77. The Oakland County prosecutor went public in February in the Detroit News and the Daily Tribune, saying that he'd been cleared in the Stebbins case, and my son was abducted in March. And that's disturbed me more than any other aspect of this case.
It could have been prevented.
Yeah, and his co-defendant gets sentenced to life in prison. I hope it's not checkbook justice. I don't believe in that, but when I talk to police officers about a 4-time convicted pedophile who never spent a day in jail and have them explain to me why one guy gets life in prison and the other guy's out on the street, their eyes roll. They don't believe me.
Brooks Patterson, the Oakland County prosecutor, received a letter from the Genesee County prosecutor at the time indicating that He knows that there is a sex ring going on involving minors. He would like to meet with the area prosecutors to discuss open cases. Christopher Bush was an open case at that time. Between the time of the office writing the criminal sexual assault charges, the preliminary examination where it was bound over, a deal is struck, he is released, and Timothy King disappears.
Money talks, and Daddy was not going to have any sort of affiliation with his kid in this capacity. And if you look at the life of Christopher Bush, he was sent elsewhere in terms of boarding schools overseas, Daddy buying him a restaurant and a home up north. This guy did anything he could to farm out his troubled child.
I guess he had a criminal record, and as you say, fit the profile designed by the task force. If I'm not mistaken, his father was a high-placed official with General Motors, so we know he would have had some means. But Christopher Bush, was mentioned, but never was able to develop him into into a suspect.
Because Christopher Bush's dad was a CFO for General Motors or something, that he had clout, and it's like, he didn't have fucking clout.
And Jane Burgess being the attorney that represented the Bushes and got Chris Bush out of basically every single charge that he had. And I mean, it's there in black and white to see. And then you have Brooks Patterson, who signed off on it because he was the prosecuting attorney at the time. So everything fell through the cracks, and I get so hung up on the fact that Brooks Patterson takes such pride in the fact that it was, he was stopping and searching every vehicle in the 70s when kids were abducted, but yet he signs off on all of these pedophiles. And who at what point was not thinking, gosh, there might be a relationship going on here, especially knowing that the boys had been molested during their time that they were in captivity.
Police officers tell me that they thought Christopher Bush was involved. In 2015, I got a phone call from a police officer at my office. We spoke for more than 2 hours, and that officer was convinced that Christopher Bush was involved, wanted to be sure that I had all the information that was available on Bush, and indicated to me that she was not the only police officer who had arrived at that conclusion.
It's fair to say that there have been constant suspicions which have lingered all these years about Christopher Bush and about his father being powerful enough to get him out of trouble, out of the most serious kind of trouble that might have led to the discovery that Bush could have been the Oakland County child killer. There were instances that we can look back on now and see that they mishandled possible evidence, didn't question people that they should have questioned, especially in connection with the island. And then in his own suicide, they clearly seemed to mishandle the evidence, hard pieces of possible evidence in his room and in his home.
And one of the items that I had FOIA'd from Oakland County was that he had supposedly committed suicide. And then within the same documents that I requested, states that the task force was disbanded within like 3 days of his supposed suicide. So I remember thinking at that point, that's total bullshit. So this person offs himself supposedly, and then all of a sudden the task force had gone to his home where the incident had happened, and then a couple of days later they disbanded.
I don't know that there's a real strong connection between what was going on Fox Island and our kids, other than I know Detective Corey Williams found Chris Bush's name among the list of clients. I've not been able to find it. Oh, and the other thing is, it would also explain his suicide if he was caught up in this huge.
In Christopher Bush's room, when the police make entry on a welfare check and they find his body, there's a picture, a hand-drawn picture of someone that is wearing a hooded jacket with a drawn around the head, screaming. And then that now becomes the folklore that is a drawing that he made of Mark Stebbins.
As I recall, they issued a 20 or 20-page report saying that they really weren't able to make a conclusion yet, but that they thought it was more likely a murder. He was found shot in his bedroom in his house. And on the wall of his bedroom was his pencil drawing. It's a young boy screaming. He has the same hairdo as Mark Stebbins, and he's wearing the same outfit Mark Stebbins was wearing when he was kidnapped. And while it may not be scientific evidence, I think the odds of that picture being up there without some knowledge of the boy is so remote as to be not discussable. Also, the police report indicates that although he committed suicide, there was no gunpowder on his fingers. And they found ropes in the closet that might have been used to tie up young boys or girls, although that is all conjecture on the rope part. And we don't know what was missing when nobody had any access to any files for 3 decades. I think if I walked into any house and saw this picture on it, I wouldn't think it was up there for artistic purposes.
When I first saw that, I'm like, yeah, that looks exactly like my brother being sodomized.
I haven't gotten this straight in. The police people I talked to about 4 convictions and no jail time, their eyes are roll.
We understand why he believes that maybe Christopher Bush is involved. And the questions were direct, and the responses were equally direct. I met with him for 3 hours at his lawyer's office.
Paul Walton wanted to meet with Lisa Milton, my Oakland County attorney, my son Chris and me. And we went out to Lisa's office, and when he came in, he brought their office copy of the pedophile case against Bush in 1977. And written on their document of the complaint was "No deal, R. Thompson." And he explained that to me as follows. He said, that's a case with enough severity that they don't want the assistant attorney general, prosecutor, excuse me, trying the cases to make decisions on what the penalty should be. And he's told me that if any prosecutor went to court and settled a case without calling either the chief assistant or the prosecutor, they would fire him.
I outlined with him the investigation surrounding Christopher Bush and the things that were in the file and the things that were strangely absent from the file, as well as the forensic evidence that existed concerning him and the concerns that we would ever have about making a declaration that Christopher Bush did this. There are a lot of interesting aspects to the Christopher Bush case. There's no question about that. But it hasn't been challenged. It becomes a story generated by investigators, and it needs to be challenged. And that's what we did. We realized that there's no defense attorney out there that is going to take this case. So we had to play both prosecutor and defense attorney and challenge every aspect in every component of the investigation. And in the end, we walk away with there's some interesting facts about this case, but for a declaration that he did it, I can't give them that declaration. If he believes it, then great. I'm glad that he has gathered the information and the information that has been presented to him, and he can reach that conclusion. But we can't.
After we talked, after he left, the three of us really concluded that the purpose of the meeting was perhaps to badmouth Thompson and Patterson. But we did not talk at anything else. He did not want to talk about anything else.
I cannot ever make a declaration that someone who is not living is guilty of something. I don't make declarations of guilt. When I was a judge, I could make declarations if the case was tried in front of me. But the only person who can determine that someone is guilty is a judge or a jury upon a complaint and warrant that's brought in a court of law. And I tell you that because as much as there are people who say, just tell me he did it, I cannot legally do that.
I can understand why the families are high on them as suspects in the case. I feel we exhausted that lead as of right now, but I would never say that they're not involved. I don't know that. I don't have the evidence to charge them with anything, but I can't say to this day they're not involved, because involvement can mean so many different things. There's so many different levels of culpability in a case where, I don't know, maybe they're connected somehow. So we just keep that in the back of our minds. We exhaust the lead as much as possible, and then we move to the next one. At that time was the one with the new forensic evidence. So, and I've explained to the Kings, and they understand that, you know, we have to follow the forensic evidence is more important than circumstantial evidence.
Local 4 News begins right now with a breaking news alert.
Finally, a break in the case that's had investigators baffled for 36 years. A stunning new development today in the Oakland County child killer investigation.
Those hairs recovered from the boys' bodies have the same mtDNA profile as the hair recovered from the 1966 Pontiac Bonneville.
And now the search is on for this new suspect.
Let me show you this 1966 Bonneville. It was a car like this that was driven by a man named Arch Sloan. Today at a press conference, prosecutor Jessica Cooper said that a hair found on Timothy King's body, a hair found on Mark Stebbins' body, and a hair found in Mr. Sloan's car are all matches. But remember that that hair does not belong to Mr. Sloan. It belongs possibly to a friend or associate of him.
Finding anyone like this who turns out to be the donor of the hair may be the key to solving these 2 murders.
Investigators say this man is a direct link to the suspect, but they still need help finding the killer.
They still don't have enough evidence to indicate that this guy Sloan's involved, but they believe that there's a distinct possibility. And we're very pleased that the state police and the other investigating officers from Livonia and the Sheriff's Department have stayed active on this case, and we can't ask for any more.
It's my understanding it is, or it was, his vehicle in terms of the hair that they had pulled, and you know, where it went after that, I don't recall. And I know at the time then too that they had pulled a hair off of Chris's blouse. And I think then that was part of the relationship. And then there's the white dog and the animals that then also draw into all of that as far as DNA testing over the years. And then tearing up Morning Bush Glory or whatever the hell the house is in Bloomfield, yes. And the warrant for that.
But I thought Sloan was a good lead, and my family encouraged follow-up on it. But nothing's been turned over to us to indicate that any of that stuff was true, and an amazing original handling of this case bothers my family immensely. 4 kids kidnapped in 4 cities, found in 4 other communities. And when we got involved again after November 30, 2007, most of this evidence was still in the original communities. Nobody had ever assembled this.
Before last night, we'd never even heard of him.
But now this man, James Gunnels, tops the list of people detectives want to talk to in a murder mystery that's haunted this area for more than 3 decades.
Who is this man police believe left a hair on the blouse of victim Christine Mahalik? His name, James Vincent Gunnels, a career criminal, identified by his multiple tattoos, both shoulders, both legs, a girl in rose on his chest, a sun on his right arm, a cowgirl on his left. They tell only part of his story. The rest comes from police reports. The defenders have learned James Gunnels grew up in Flint and was best friends with nephews of Christopher Bush. Christopher Bush eventually molested Gunnels at his northern Michigan cottage. Still, police refuse to talk about Gunnels publicly.
Go on the record in the press indicating the evidence they had and asking people to come forward.
When police looked into Gunnels as a suspect, they crossed the country, flying to a prison in Montana. He intentionally threw a polygraph test there, and when his DNA was a mitochondrial match to the hair on the body of Christine Mahalik, police shuffled some paperwork and had Gunnels transferred to a prison in Michigan, hoping the close proximity would give them more opportunities to get information, a move the families like.
I've been tearing myself up for 35 years because there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about this.
Police questioned Gunnels' cellmate, who told them that Gunnels claimed to be molested at 15 years old by a man that killed multiple people, and that he believed he was told the victims were children, and that Gunnels may have been minimizing what he knew about or his involvement in the Oakland County child killings. Today, Gunnels has served his time and is a free man living in Kalamazoo. The defenders broke the story for the first time ever, a DNA link between someone and the Oakland County child killer case. A man who is still alive, walking the streets, a man the defenders recently caught up with while hidden cameras were rolling.
They took that and they twisted it to their advantage. Now, do I feel I was a fall guy for them? Hell yeah. I feel I still am, to some degree.
This is James Vincent Gunnels, the only known physical link in the Oakland County child killer case. Tonight, you will hear him tell his story for the first time ever.
I'm done living in fear of what they have told people.
The defenders broke the story earlier this year. Police tested Gunnels' DNA against a hair found on the shirt of Christine Mahalik, one of 4 known victims abducted, held captive, and eventually killed in 1976 and 1977 by the Oakland County child killer. Gunnels is a mitochondrial DNA match, which means it's his hair or a relative of his on his mother's side. The families of the victims are certain Gunnels knows what happened. They want him ordered to testify before the grand jury under oath to find out what he knows.
Some of them are wrong, and nobody seems to want to believe it, so you know.
Since breaking the story, the defenders have repeatedly asked Gunnels for interviews. Each time, he's refused. So he headed out with hidden cameras rolling to find out more about the man who is the best lead in the 35-year-old murder mystery.
I told my story, Mike, 100%. Didn't add nothing now. Story to the state police.
We find Gunnels out riding his bike after being released a few months back from prison following a series of break-ins, robberies, and car theft. He lives in Kalamazoo now, and on this day, he's out looking for a job. He stops for a smoke break at a local rec center and continues on. When we approach Gunnels, we tell him we're from Local 4 News and are surprised when he opens up and starts talking.
My heart goes out to those families, brother. It really, really, really does. I don't feel that they would serve justice through any of this.
Then stunned as he goes on in great detail about the evidence, the cops, and the victims' families.
I'm not guilty. There it is there. But at the same time, I know how the state police twist words to their advantage.
According to police records, Gunnels' story is that he was a teenager at the time of the Oakland County child killings. He was molested by one of several key suspects in the case, a man named Christopher Bush. While the families of the victims and some police speculate that gunnels may have been used to lure children to the car of the killer and forced to put the victims' bodies on the side of the road after they were killed, Gunnels says it is not the case.
I don't know what they're telling them, man. Right. You know, I don't. All I know is that, it's a victim.
Gunnels says if his hair is on one of the victims, it's because he was in Chris Bush's car on several occasions, and somehow his hair was transferred to the victim's body. He says he never saw Chris Bush attack anyone other than himself.
I see right now on the record, I don't know what that man did to anybody else.
Gunnels has thought about telling his story to the victims' families.
At one point, I was going to sit down with the families and talk to them,
insisting he feels terrible for them.
I couldn't imagine having that happen and not know for all these years. I really couldn't.
Especially because of the way police have handled the case.
By them to keep people thinking, well, yeah, we're working this case and we're doing everything we possibly can.
He does not trust investigators on the task force.
Over and over and over, man, I say to myself, that's corruption. That's these people doing some things to twist the truth, man.
Saying interrogators tried to trick him.
They're legally allowed to tell me anything. They can lie to me, say anything they want. Whether that was their motive at that time or not, I don't know.
Gunnels tells us he has nothing to hide.
I can't incriminate myself if I'm not guilty.
While insinuating he knows so much more.
I wish I could tell you that. I really do. I mean, seriously, I am right now. I'm getting emotional about thinking about things that I wish I could say, and I wish the public could.
The theory was that Christopher Bush knew Mr. Gunnels. Mr. Gunnels was being used as a lure to bring Timothy King into the car, and that's how he was abducted. So let's make it clear. This hair that Mr. King is talked about, Christopher Bush is excluded. He is not a contributor. Mr. Gunnels could be, but the statistical odds are about 1 in 150, which when you expand that out to all the population of Michigan at the time, is hundreds of thousands of people. So it has limited forensic importance.
I spoke to the supervisor of the DNA unit at Quantico about our case, and we talked at length about it. And the problem with this, with the genealogy, is it takes a specific type of DNA to get the genealogy results that we would need for our case. There's many different kinds of DNA. And so it's not to say that we can't or that we're not looking into it. We're continuing to look into it. But it's only certain types where you can get the positive results that you need, like they did in the Golden State killings. But we're looking at it.
DNA was not a testing mechanism at the time. It was 3 letters in the alphabet, not even connected.
I was very encouraged that they've got this DNA match. Nothing's ever come of it. And you have to remember that there was no DNA match when these kids were kidnapped.
Every time, whether it was Lamborghini or Norberg or Bush or Sloan, the family, you want to talk about pain, that's what we do. And so you try and be as circumspect as you possibly can, because you're hurting. It hurts. The pain is never going to go away, and when you're talking about the investigation, it becomes even rawer. And so you can see what's happened to some of the individuals who respond to this type of pain differently.
The Oakland County prosecutor, Jessica Cooper, is telling us that this case is active and being worked very aggressively, but they do not comment on open cases. Wayne County prosecutor Kim Worthy tells us they're keeping the victim families up to speed on what's going on. The Michigan State Police confirm an additional investigator has been recently assigned to the case because of the activity. Task force sources say it now appears Wayne and Oakland County may be running separate independent investigations, and the families say they deserve more cooperation from all of law enforcement. Secrets revealed for the first time. The 4 murders all connected by dog hair. Human hair on victim Christine Mihalik is mitochondrial DNA match to this man, Vincent Gunnels, an ex-convict living in Kalamazoo who was molested by a key suspect in the Oakland County child killer case. Investigators have a theory Gunnels may have lured kids to Christopher Bush. The victims' families were never told, and they are angry about it.
The Michigan Constitution says that crime victims have a right to confer with the prosecutor.
After digging with the King family, my own investigation, and talking with different law enforcement, it turns out that they have mountains of evidence.
The families feel like the investigators are keeping too much information a secret. They believe the public could help if police would let them. Investigators created a detailed PowerPoint presentation with all the new evidence and now are refusing to share it.
Just feed them a line of crap and they'll just keep taking it, spoon feed it to them, and as long as we give them something, they won't do anything about it. Just keep the families at bay. That's all it boils down to.
What may be more upsetting, it appears Wayne County and Oakland County may be running two separate investigations. The defenders confirming 3 Wayne County investigators were up north Tuesday asking questions in Mount Morenci, where Chris Bush molested young children at a cottage. It appears Oakland County and the Michigan State Police had no idea they were tracking new leads in what is supposed to be a team investigation.
We've been consistently working this case for almost 15 years. We have a personal interest in it, a personal stake, but mainly because of the relationship we developed with the King family. They are wonderful people. We care about them exponentially. We try to keep them informed as best we can when we're investigating a case. We obviously can't keep them informed of every little thing that we're working on. But I have to say that I think Sergeant Williams would say the same thing. That's the primary motivation of bringing some justice to that family.
Well, I remember in 1977, there were complaints that the various jurisdictions didn't work well together. And you'd think they'd learn from their lesson and coordinate their efforts now and make sure this doesn't happen again.
It would be great to have good cooperation all along, especially from people who should be cooperating with you willingly and happily. You know, our motto here, for the most part, has been, we really don't care who gets the credit at the end if we can get to a just solution.
The sharing information is so important, and that's what maybe hindered the investigation early on back in the 70s. Was I think there was some egos involved and lack of sharing, and a little of that happened in 2008, 2009 in this investigation, but it was ironed out and we've all worked great together. I think the public would be so surprised. I know the families know some of it, the victims' families, but would be so surprised at how much work has been done and how we've advanced this case as a team.
Mr. King seems to think that the authorities are covering something up and that maybe they have some sort of answer that we should know about. I'm not willing to go that far. I hope Mr. King lives long enough, though, to see this case solved.
I don't know that it will ever be solved, and I have to say that I don't think about it like I used to, just simply because I don't want to say you can't dwell on it and you can't think about it, but there's only so much you can do. And when you have someone so powerful as someone in Oakland County working against you and not willing to share information, how far are you going to get?
I mean, I've had individual cases where cops have been killed, that little girl who was molested, and each one of those, I can remember them because it affected me. But this one here is probably the one that gnaws the most because A, it was so large, and B, it's unsolved.
I named my oldest son after my brother, Mark Stebbins II.
And there have been many suspects along the way, and they've always talked about Chris Bush and other people, and they've done, I don't know, it's frustrating that they can't figure out who did this, but there's 1 million people in the world, 1 billion people in the world, and how do you narrow down the one?
My family's not very confident about it, but I feel even worse not knowing the answer is the fact that the people who looked into it after 40 years won't talk about it.
They deserve that. Yeah, I hope it's solved for his sake. Somebody can go and tell him. And I hope that person is Corey Williams.
Denise Powell and Becky MacArthur from the State Police, Sean Callahan and Brooke Glennon from the FBI, our whole team of investigators from our office, Kim Worthy and Rob Moran, have done so much work, and it's been blood, sweat, and tears to advance this case. We're all disappointed we haven't solved it yet, but I'm telling you right now, this case can be solved, and I believe it will be. And our team of investigators are not gonna give up. We're gonna work hard the next 11 months, or as long as I have left on this job, to see if we can bring this to closure. And if not, we will assist the new detectives so they can hit the ground running.